The day I shut off water to 342 homes wasn't my proudest, but it was the most satisfying. You don't understand that kind of satisfaction until you've been threatened in cursive by a woman in pearls who thinks private property is a suggestion. Her name was Beverly Claremont, HOA president, lawn color inspector, and the only person I've ever seen wear heels to threaten legal action. She stood at my front door in a heat wave so thick it could boil coffee, demanding I restore essential access to community resources. What she meant was, turn the water back on or we'll make your life a paperwork prison. I took a sip of iced tea, gave her a smile that tasted like no, and closed the door. Because if there's one thing worse than an HOA with power, it's one that thinks it owns yours. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from, your town, your porch, or even your HOA war zone. If you love true feeling stories packed with twists, justice, and just the right dose of HOA drama, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale, even juicier. And the next twist, let's just say, it might come with paperwork, popcorn, and poetic revenge. You won't want to miss it. I wasn't always a Texas rancher. My roots were in shipping logistics, spreadsheets, port schedules, and overpriced coffee in San Diego. But when my father passed unexpectedly, I came back to take care of the only place he ever loved. 17 acres of stubborn land, worn boots, and a freshwater spring that had served our family for 3 generations. It wasn't a fortune, but it was ours. And after years of tracking packages across oceans, I figured maybe it was time to track purpose instead. I didn't know this would mean tracking trespassers across my fence line or calling a lawyer to explain why there was a buried PVC pipeline running through my creek bed. But that's what happens when the past leaves you land, and the present shows up with a clipboard and entitlement. It started subtle, a glossy welcome packet in the mailbox. An invitation to meet the Maplewood Summit HOA board. Beverly's opening line at that cocktail party was, "You must be Nathan Kane. I loved your father, such a rustic spirit." Which, in HOA terms, meant he didn't manicure his land and we hated him for it. She smiled like someone offering a casserole full of poison, and then slid an offer across the table to buy the property. Below market value, naturally. For recreational expansion, she said, as if building a second golf bunker justified uprooting a century of family history. I declined with grace. She responded with violation notices. Unpermitted structure, a barn, visual disharmony, trees, potential weed migration risk. I wasn't sure if that was about plants or people, but either way I got the message. Then came the trench, dug under my fence line, hugging the creek like it was supposed to be there. It wasn't. Freshly installed pipe, heading straight toward Maplewood's decorative lake like they were siphoning serenity from my land and calling it landscaping. I didn't get angry. I documented, called in a surveyor. Then I called Margot Lynn, my old college friend turned attorney who made her reputation suing HOAs so hard they had to rename subdivisions to shake the shame. She showed up in boots and a ponytail, took one look at the trench and said, "They're stealing water. That's a felony, and they're doing it with the kind of confidence that says they've done it before." Turns out, that spring on my land fed into an aquifer. Maplewood needed more than they needed truth. And Beverly? She needed it under control. So I went looking for leverage and found it in the most poetic place imaginable, my dad's file cabinet. Tucked behind dusty tax returns was a notarized map of the original spring rights, dated 1978. With that, trail cam footage of Maplewood's facilities manager sneaking through the tree line and Margot's legal muscle. I wasn't just ready to fight. I was ready to own the boardroom from the saddle. Beverly thought she was playing politics. What she didn't know was that I came from a long line of men who built fences that stood longer than lies. And I wasn't about to let 342 homes built on arrogance drink one more drop without remembering exactly where it came from. Stick around. The pipeline's just getting pressurized. You ever walk your own land and feel like something's breathing beneath it? That's what it felt like the morning I noticed a weird patch of freshly turned earth near the southern fence line. The grass hadn't grown back yet, and the dirt looked like someone had tried to tuck in a secret. I followed the line like a detective with boots and a bad feeling, and that's when I saw it. PVC pipe, running straight from Hollow Creek, my property, and headed due north, like it was catching a train to HOAville. No flags, no markers, just quiet theft wearing a coat of soil. I didn't need a map. I needed a lawyer and a strong cup of coffee. I called Maya Solis before I even brushed the mud off my jeans. We'd gone to UT together. She became a real estate attorney and I became the guy with a ranch and a problem. She drove out that afternoon, heels in the truck bed, boots on her feet. "This," she said, crouching by the pipe like it owed her money, "is a big fat violation. Turns out, if you dig through someone's land, steal their water, and don't even send a fruit basket, it's illegal in all 50 states. No easement, no permit, no written agreement. They didn't just cross the line, they tunneled under it." She looked at me. "Start documenting. Everything." And just like that, the tone shifted. From invasion to investigation. So, I did what any irritated Texan with Wi-Fi and a highlighter would do. I started a folder. Every HOA letter went in, every visit got logged, every comment muttered by a neighbor while just walking their dog got typed up like courtroom testimony. And just as Maya predicted, the HOA didn't just trespass. They monetized it. Word started bubbling up from inside Clear Hollow. Residents were being charged an extra $300, 0 cents per quarter for water infrastructure upgrades. Turns out, the HOA was funding their little pipe dream by bleeding their own. It was like robbing Peter to flood Paul's gardenia beds. And Paul didn't know he was in the middle of a water war. 3 nights later, my birdhouse blinked. That's not a metaphor. I'd installed trail cameras inside fake birdhouses along the fence line, and at 2:03 a.m., one of them caught movement. It was Brad, HOA facilities manager. Flashlight in hand, clipboard under arm, and about as sneaky as a cat in a dog park. He crept along the creek like he was casing a museum, then crouched down, whispering into his phone. The audio was fuzzy, but one phrase punched through like a siren in a church. "Yes, Miss Ellery, I'm expanding the valve now." That was the HOA president, by the way, and that clip? That clip made my next move clear. I sent the footage to Maya, who called me back in under 5 minutes. "We've got him," she said. "Now let's see how deep this pipeline runs." The next day, while sorting through my dad's old files, looking for any easement agreements just to cover every angle, I found something that made my stomach drop. A document stamped and signed, or forged. Dated 2 years ago, it was an agreement granting water access rights to Clear Hollow. My dad's name was at the bottom, but the signature? It looked like someone had copied it from a birthday card. He never signed this. He never would have. And that's when I realized this wasn't just theft, it was identity theft with plumbing. Stick around, because next we trace the forgery and I start planting landmines. Legal ones. I didn't just buy a spring. I bought a pressure point. Quietly, through an LLC with a name boring enough to bore a judge, I acquired the rocky patch where Hollow Creek begins its journey. The same creek that feeds my land and, until recently, was feeding a luxury development with delusions of divine plumbing rights. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about leverage. I wasn't cutting off their water. I was just putting a hand on the faucet, legally, and when you're holding the faucet, you learn something. People who build kingdoms on borrowed pipelines panic when the flow slows down. Maya called it preliminary conservation compliance. I called it watching rich-grass die from my porch. We installed a remote control valve upstream, fully permitted, filed, and signed by the same water board Beverly used to ignore. No press releases, no warnings, just a slow, polite trickle, where there used to be entitlement. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, a few confused maintenance calls. But by day 3, sprinklers coughed like old smokers and fountains stood still like frozen assets. The HOA didn't know whether to blame the city, the weather, or the moon. And I just stayed quiet, because the only thing more dangerous than a man with land is one with silence, proof, and a sister in media. Their board meetings became panic parties with folding chairs. According to a neighbor who secretly sent me screen recordings, the HOA's internal chat lit up like a Christmas tree in a wildfire. Pressure anomalies, irrigation failure in Sector B, homeowner complaints escalating. But the best message came from someone named Kevin, the treasurer. Does anyone know where the spring is actually located? That line right there was worth every cent of the purchase. Because while they were still guessing who owned the source, I was sipping lemonade on my porch, watching hydrangeas surrender like truth in a courtroom. Meanwhile, the residents, poor souls, were paying water infrastructure assessments like they were investing in bottled rainbows. $300, 0 cents a quarter. Jules found the fee breakdown buried in the HOA's online ledger. Fancy words, vague categories, and one line item marked Aquatic Reliability Continuity. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Sounds like a scam wrapped in a sprinkler." It wasn't just mismanagement. It was profit by pipeline. Theft turned invoice. And Brad, the facilities guy, had been the quiet plumber behind the curtain. Until now, that is. Because our trail cams had him on video, flashlight in one hand, phone in the other, whispering Beverly's name as he fiddled with my creek valve at 2:00, i.e. We didn't go public yet, not because we were scared, but because the buildup is the best part of the storm. Let the HOA bake under a dry sun. Let the rumor mill grind its gears. Let the dues-paying residents wonder why their lawns looked thirsty while their boardrooms smelled like fear. When we finally released the footage of Brad, of the pipeline, of Beverly's forged document signed with my dead father's name, it would hit like a burst pipe in winter, but not yet. First, we were going to let them sweat. After all, when you own the headwaters, you own the heat. By the time Brielle Ellery showed up at my gate with a bullhorn and a camera crew, I knew we were getting warm. Not summer in Texas warm, more like cornered Karen in Kashmir kind of heat. She stood in her designer flats on my gravel driveway, flanked by a few HOA loyalists who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "This man," she bellowed through a megaphone that squealed every third word, "is a water terrorist." The irony? She screamed that while standing 10 feet from a natural creek I legally owned, one her HOA had been siphoning from like it came with their closing papers. I didn't say a word. I just sipped coffee on the porch and raised one finger to the birdhouse camera. They'd hear the truth soon enough. That evening, Jules dropped the hammer. Her investigative piece aired on the evening news and exploded online before midnight. Footage of the illegal pipeline, time-stamped clips of Brad's midnight plumbing adventure, the forged agreement bearing my father's wobbly, photocopied signature, and the cherry on top, a breakdown of the inflated water assessments Clear Hollow had been charging their residents. Turns out HOA corruption is like mildew. It thrives in shady corners and always smells worse in public. By morning, my inbox was flooded with anonymous thank you notes from inside the neighborhood. But the HOA board, they went full damage control, which in their case meant denial, deflection, and another emergency meeting with gluten-free muffins and zero accountability. When City Hall called for a formal mediation, I almost felt bad. Almost. It was set in the council chamber, a place that smelled like furniture polish and small-town tension. Maya and I took one side of the table, Brielle, Brad, and their rattled attorney took the other. Across from us sat the mayor, 2 legal observers, and a very annoyed water district official who looked like he'd rather be unclogging a septic tank. The mayor tried to keep things civil, but let's be honest, it wasn't a meeting. It was a courtroom in khakis, decorated with potted cacti and lukewarm coffee. The HOA lawyer opened with, "There appears to be a misunderstanding," which is legal speak for "we got caught and we're stalling for time." I let Maya handle the legal talk. I just sat there flipping through the HOA bylaws like I was browsing a menu I already knew by heart. Then the residents arrived. They didn't come in angry. They came in informed. Thanks to Jules, they'd seen the videos, read the documents, and realized they'd been paying for a lie with their utility checks. One after another stood up to speak. A mom holding a dead houseplant, a retired veteran with copies of his inflated water bill, even Mike Hansen, the HOA treasurer turned whistleblower, who admitted under oath that the board had known about the pipeline but thought the Morgan family would never notice. That's when Maya leaned in and whispered, "This next part? Watch their faces." Because what came next didn't just boil the water, it scalded the story. Jules had held back one ace bank records. Turns out Clear Hollow had been diverting a chunk of those special assessments into a community development reserve. What was it funding? Not pipes, not repairs, not even HOA bingo night. No, the money had quietly paid for landscaping at Brielle's house, a back patio expansion at Brad's place, and, get this, a private country club membership billed as water advisory training. The room went silent like someone had flipped the valve on their collective outrage. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was embezzlement with a manicured manicure. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Because someone from the environmental board dropped a file on the table marked "Pending Violation. Unauthorized infrastructure near protected wetlands." That's right, they didn't just steal water, they may have broken federal law doing it. Stick around, the next part? Arrest, resignations, and one very uncomfortable HOA bake sale. You know things are about to get biblical when the EPA shows up with clipboards and federal badges. It was a Thursday, hot enough to fry HOA policies on the hood of a Camry, when the investigators rolled into Clear Hollow like they were filming a crime docuseries. And let's be real, they basically were. One went straight for the HOA office, another for Brielle's house. I watched from my porch, sipping iced tea, watching her custom fountain sputter its last few drops. It was almost poetic. The woman who tried to control a water supply was now surrounded by investigators in polos labeled environmental enforcement. Brielle's empire didn't just spring a leak. It cracked wide open like a rotten pipe under pressure. Cliff went first, vice president of the HOA, retired CPA, and possibly the most nervous man in loafers I've ever seen. Within hours, he'd flipped faster than a pancake on Sunday. He gave them everything: emails, deposit logs, even a recording of Brielle admitting she tweaked a few line items in the HOA budget for neighborhood beautification, which apparently meant granite countertops for her kitchen, but it was the chemical dumping that sealed her fate. According to Cliff, after our water shutoff went viral, Brielle tried to fake a contamination event to frame me. They bought industrial solvents under a landscaping business, poured it near the downstream creek, and filed a bogus complaint with a state inspector who, surprise, just happened to be her cousin. The media had a field day. Water scandal, water theft, forged documents, and chemical fraud splashed across every local headline, followed by a montage of angry residents and a very shaky Brad getting into a police cruiser. The footage showed the luxury development's entrance fountains, once the pride of their welcome brochure, now dry and cracked under the heat. Even the stone HOA sign had started to chip, like it couldn't wait to be rebranded, and while Brielle tried to deny everything with the poise of a beauty queen at a tax audit, the receipts were unrelenting. $218,000, 0 cents in misappropriated funds. A storage unit full of unreported equipment. A voice memo where she said, and I quote, "If this all goes south, I'm booking the next flight to Cancun." Spoiler, she didn't make it. Sheriff's deputies intercepted her at the regional airport, dragging a designer suitcase stuffed with $9,000, 0 cents in cash, and 2 burner phones. She didn't just fall, she cannonballed into her own cover-up like it was pool season at Rikers. The community, once divided, now had a common enemy and one question left to ask: what now? The water was flowing again. The lies were exposed. The HOA was legally gutted, But as Maya asked me that night, staring at the reopened creek with her boots in the mud, "You've won the fight, Jax. What are you going to do with the piece?" And that's where we head next, because justice isn't just about the fall, it's about what rises after. Let me know when you're ready for the final chapter. Sekti, the closure, the legacy, and the twist. They say the best revenge is living well, but out here, the best revenge is clean water and quiet land. A month after Brielle's empire dried up faster than her alibi, I stood beside the newly finished signpost for the Morgan Creek Conservation Trail. That name meant something, not just to me, but to every kid who would walk its path with a field notebook and a water tester. I donated the land, 3 shaded acres along the creek, because Dad always said knowledge is the only thing worth giving away for free. Funny how a stolen pipeline turned into a public classroom. Life, it turns out, is less about walls and more about where the gates lead. The new HOA board signed the water agreement with less drama and more humility. Lisa, the former protester who once yelled at my mailbox like it personally offended her, now chairs the board. To her credit, she brought cookies to our final meeting and apologized for calling me a selfish land baron on local TV. I told her we were even as long as she never mentioned community synergy again. The agreement's simple. They pay market rate, we monitor the flow, and all pipes stay where the law says they should. No secrets, no surprises, just shared water and shared responsibility. You'd be amazed how civilized people get once they realize the faucet doesn't turn without consent. I'd thought for a while I might return to Silicon Valley, slip back into the soft glow of startup dashboards and overpriced coffee. But this land has roots, not just under my boots, but under my skin. The rhythm of fence repair, creek watching, and porch coffee changed something in me. I stayed, because while tech gave me paychecks, this place gave me purpose. Besides, I'd already built a Wi-Fi system that works better than anything Brielle ever promised, and I can troubleshoot it in flip-flops. Mom's garden is thriving again. Turns out flowers grow best when they aren't surrounded by trespassers with clipboards. We added a gazebo near the creek in Dad's memory, and I catch her there sometimes, just sitting, sipping tea, watching the water like it's telling stories only she understands. "He'd be proud of what you did," she told me one morning. "Not because you fought, but because you stood still when it counted." That line stuck with me. There's power in staying rooted, even when others try to uproot you. Especially then. So yeah, they thought they'd drown my future in paperwork. Turns out I planted mine in the headwaters. And now, it's growing, slow, steady, and undeniable. The creek runs cleaner, the land breathes easier, the neighbors wave. Even the silence feels less like tension and more like peace finally catching its breath. And if another HOA comes knocking someday with a smirk and a lowball offer, well, I've got the deed, the data, and a daughter of Texas land who knows better than to back down from a bluff. And here's what I learned when the water finally settled. It was never just about a pipe, or a board meeting, or even the land itself. It was about respect. For boundaries, for legacy, for the quiet kind of dignity that doesn't show up with bullhorns but still stands its ground when pushed. They wanted to turn our creek into a commodity. But water, like truth, flows where it's earned, not where it's stolen. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. About what happens when regular folks, ranchers, retirees, even reformed protesters decide to stop being polite and start being precise. It's proof that when you own your story, no HOA, no developer, no forged signature can take it from you. They tried to drown us in bureaucracy. We answered with community. So if this story meant something to you, if you've ever stood on your own porch, heart pounding, knowing you're right, but feeling like the world's stacked against you, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hit that like button for every neighbor who chose courage over comfort. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's tale, let's just say it involves a rooster with boundary issues, a lawyer who hates feathers, and one backyard that became a courtroom. Until then, keep your water clean, your paperwork tighter, and your gate locked just enough to make 'em knock twice. This has been Jax's story, and if it helped you stand a little taller, then every drop was worth it.